the basement of your house flooded from an open water tap, would you keep a person there to bail out the water, or would you close the tap and stop the flow? Charles Dite. In the 1920s, the Minnesota Eugenics Society pushed to eliminate all feeble-mindedness across the state. Through legislation, radio talks, publication, and informational booths, no man, woman, or child was left untouched by the eugenics movement. Due to the morals of the progressive era, a small group of Minnesotans took it upon themselves to assist the American public in the cleansing of the nation through the eugenics movement. These actions restricted thousands of Minnesotans deemed feeble-minded the rights to make decisions for themselves and procreate. Brought on by the challenges of the Industrial Revolution, the progressive era sought economic, political, social, and moral reforms in the 1920s. In the name of bettering society, the United States government prohibited the sale of alcohol, tightened regulations on sweatshops, and reformed child labor laws. Immigration was restricted so the American way of life could flourish. In addition to the political and moral responsibilities of America, eugenics was a highlight of social reform. From the 1920s to the 1940s, society viewed people with disabilities as genetically inferior, defective, and polluting the race. Their solution to the problem was to institutionalize, sterilize, and exterminate those deemed feeble-minded or delinquent. According to the Merriam-Webster Dictionary, eugenics is defined as the science dealing with improvement, as by selective breeding, of hereditary qualities, especially of human beings. Who were these human beings that lacked superior qualities or defined as feeble-minded? Associate Professor of History at York University and scholar on eugenics and sterilization in Minnesota, Molly Ladd Taylor explains.
What made them considered to be feeble-minded? Lack of education, a low performance on an IQ test was one thing, although there were other things you could, IQ wasn't mentioned in the law. People who perhaps weren't native English speakers, people who lived on farms or in rural areas didn't have much education, and also people with a whole variety of kinds of disabilities, what we would now call intellectual or learning disabilities, and sometimes physical disabilities as well.
Fostered by eugenicists, doctors, and scientists alike, ideas of the eugenics movement spread quickly from New York to California. The American Eugenics Society educated the public and spread ideas that certain traits were undesirable and that those traits should be eliminated, thus the implementation of sterilization laws and policies. The first sterilization laws were passed in Indiana in 1907. This created a domino effect that saw other states soon following with their own. 38 of the 40 states had sterilization laws, voluntary or involuntarily, for the feeble-minded. Sterilization policies hit a peak in 1927 when the Supreme Court justified forced sterilization of people with disabilities was not in violation of their constitutional rights in the case Buck v. Bell. Justice Holmes stated in the opinion of the court that Carrie Buck, probable potential parent of socially inadequate offspring, likewise afflicted that she may be sexually sterilized without detriment to her general health, and that her welfare and that of society will be promoted by her sterilization, and thereupon make the order. James Watson, recipient of the Nobel Prize in Physiology and Medicine and former director of Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory, describes the effects regarding the decision.
It was an order from the top, you couldn't really defend yourself. The judges had the right to say, sterilize you. Civil liberties in those days were primitive compared to what they are today. Well, taking away the right of a woman to have a child, you could say, what worse could you do to a woman? But in those days, they said, it would be even worse for you to have descendants.
Though Buck v. Bell opened the floodgates for forced sterilization across the nation in 1927, a sterilization law and eugenics idea had already been established in Minnesota. A 1917 Minnesota law provided for compulsory commitment of feeble-minded persons to the care and custody of the State Board of Control. This meant that those institutionalized as feeble-minded were now at the mercy of the state. The law was later edited and passed through legislature with ease in 1925, allowing for sterilization of anyone committed as feeble-minded and insane who had been institutionalized for 6 months. It required the consent of a spouse or guardian. If there was no one available, then the State Board of Control made the decision for them. Sterilizations occurred in high numbers in the 1930s and 40s. There were 2,350 sterilization victims in Minnesota. Of that, 519 were male and 1,831 were female. About 18% were deemed mentally ill and 82% deemed deficient. Although there was broad support throughout Minnesota, there was opposition to the sterilization bill, including concerns about too much police power being given to doctors and the intrusion into family life. The Catholic Church was firmly opposed to any method of birth control, including sterilization. This law may not have been championed were it not for the loud and outspoken claims of Charles Fremont Dite. Dite was responsible for bringing eugenics to Minnesota. Dite, a physician in Minneapolis, started the Minnesota Eugenics Society in 1923 and began campaigning for the sterilization law shortly thereafter. The eugenics movement was kept alive because of the excessive publications of Dite, including over 300 letters to Minneapolis daily newspapers, 1935 pamphlet on the history and early stages of the organized eugenics movement for human betterment in Minnesota, a 1936 book entitled Call for a New Social Order. In 1933, he sent a letter to Adolf Hitler and included with it one of his letters to the editor in which he commended Hitler's work in Germany. Although Dite might have been eccentric and extreme, his publications are just one example of an excess of information that was available to the Minnesota public at the height of the eugenics popularity. In addition, there were informational booths at the state fair, radio talks, best baby and fitter family competitions, and daily articles in newspapers. In 1938, Dite died among the chaos, and with him died the Minnesota Eugenics Society. In an attempt to continue the movement, Dite willed $75,000 to the University of Minnesota to continue the work he started. Because of his generous donation, a wing was dedicated to him and named the Dite Institute for the Promotion of Human Genetics. The name was controversial and deemed inappropriate due to his enthusiasm towards eugenics and was later renamed. In addition to the controversy surrounding the Dite Institute, the Nazi atrocities regarding genetic experiments made the eugenics movement even more unfavorable. According to Laine Taylor, other reasons for losing support included greater knowledge of human genetics, a new understanding of the capabilities of people with mental disabilities, and the changed philosophy of a new generation of mental health professionals. In 1975, the law was changed to protect citizens in Minnesota from unwanted sterilization. Sterilization practices continue in Minnesota today, although rights of patients have greatly changed. In 2010, victims of unwanted sterilization finally received the apology they deserved when the state legislature passed a resolution apologizing for the past care provided in state hospitals. Advocates worked for 13 years to get it passed. The resolution apologized to those wrongfully committed to state institutions, whereas some residents of these state institutions were subjected to medical experiments and procedures without their consent, including the routine subjection of women inmates to involuntary sterilization, and whereas these fellow Minnesotans were portrayed by some as subhuman organisms, as deviant individuals to be feared by society, and as eternal children unaccountable for their behavior and incapable of speaking for themselves or shaping their own lives, which greatly diminished their fellow citizens' ability and willingness to accept them for their own unique qualities. Within this resolution, Minnesota legislators acknowledged that these actions had once been accepted by the public but were now seen as wrong. This apology takes responsibility for the loss of thousands of Minnesotans' rights and hardships endured during the eugenics movement. Laine Taylor further explains the long-standing effects of these hardships on those sterilized.
Most importantly, sterilization affected people personally. Individuals who wanted to have children weren't able to have children, and families were fragmented.
Today's society looks at those previously defined as feeble-minded with an attitude of self-determination and independence. Programs, resources, and aid are provided to assist those with developmental disabilities or mental illness in maintaining an independent lifestyle. Michael Reisman, a retired occupational therapist who worked in the Rochester State Hospital, considers the complexity of an event such as this and the people whose lives it affected when he asked, "How am I to view them? As defectives, leading weak, shattered, meaningless lives, or as examples of amazing courage, resilience, determination, and heart in the face of inhuman conditions? I prefer to feel that I was fortunate to witness the possibilities of the human spirit, albeit wrapped in tragedy."